Chris Chibnall's first two series as showrunner of Doctor Who are genuinely quite interesting to contrast, because though they are sequential series of the show, I can't help but feel that they are so markedly different from one another. So today I want to look at the major differences in these, from the characters, villains, stories, to the style of the show. I'm going to talk about the differences I personally see in these series, as well as discussing what worked for me and what didn't, and ultimately picking a favorite of the two. I hope you enjoy me for this discussion as I look at the notable differences between Series 11 and Series 12. Also, there's going to be plenty of spoilers throughout. Series 11 and 12 are both unique to the revived era of the show in that they both feature three main companions in the lead, and no, River Song does not really count. She was in less than half of Series 6. The show has never tried to make three companions a staple of the show before. In Series 11, the Doctor herself gets treated as this inspired alien who has a real childlike awe for the universe, and loves to explore and see new things.
Is really big and incredibly beautiful.
Those 6 of Series 11 stories are actually set on Earth. And while she encounters some challenging situations throughout her first season, Series 12 was where the character was really pushed from being this much more chipper Doctor who was able to deal with everything life threw at her to a reasonable degree, to absolute devastation as she was forced to deal with situations on her own, face her best friend and enemy, discover the destruction of her homeworld, meet an incarnation of herself whom she did not know about, learn the lie of the timeless child, and say goodbye to her companions. The character is put through significantly more difficult situations throughout Series 12 and tested a lot more, but there are still points in this where she is able to have fun as she gets wrapped up in these adventures with her friends. It's quite a significant difference in the treatment of the character simply by the nature of the situations the stories put her into. When you look at the companions, we see Graham and Ryan have a rather clear arc of dealing with the death of Grace, and that influencing their relationship with one another and coming closer together by the end of the series. Yet once we get into Series 12, the characters definitely aren't given as much of a highlight or even an arc really, with some flirting at the idea that Ryan won't always be staying in the TARDIS and a little bit done with him being there for his friend Tibbo. Graham has some concerns regarding his cancer coming back and of course has his tearful moments. But throughout those 11 episodes and 9 stories, the characters don't get nearly the focus they did in Series 11, where they were actively building up this relationship throughout, in addition to being, at least in my estimation, more involved in the actual stories, though I do like what we get out of Ryan in the 2019 special Resolution. And I do count this one as a Series 12 story, but I won't be surprised to see people disagreeing with me on that. Yaz is the most clear-cut character for me, where we do get a little bit of characterization for her in Series 11, but compared to all the others, she just isn't developed and explored as much as her fellow companions in the Doctor. We get hints as to her aspirations, from her life on the Force to her wanting more from the universe, but to me it was largely just vague hints, with that never really being explored for her in Series 11. Yet when we get into Series 12, I do think that the writers of the show handled her much better, testing the character in more difficult situations, giving her more time with Graham, which I enjoyed, and actually having her be a big part of Can You Hear Me's discussion on mental health, and using that to explore the backstory of that character, which we hadn't really known much about. For these characters on the whole, it's really a bit of a mixed bag for both series, because Series 11 gives a good amount of development to Ryan and Graham, while giving what I feel is a bit of a lack of focus to the lead character in her debut series, though I still liked her a lot throughout and she was genuinely good. And it hardly gave much shine to Yaz either. When we get into Series 12, we see the Doctor get a much more prominent and driven role in what I consider to be a notable step up in terms of her characterization, with Yaz getting a much more prominent role as well, where we get better insight into what drives her and what she has gone through. And with Graham, while still being fun to have around, he got hardly more to do than Yaz did in Series 11, and Ryan got arguably even less. Between these, it's hard to pick which one I think did the better job, but I am going to opt for Series 12, as it does give focus to who I consider to be the more important central character of the show, even if the companions suffer a little bit for it. The actual villains of these different stories happen to be one of the areas I find there to be a significant difference in. Series 11 had a great deal of variety, with 8 different villains depending on how you count them, and only one of those appearing in more than one story. It feels like each week is a chance for you to experience something new, and naturally some of those villains worked and some of them didn't so much. You have the committed soldier in Tim Shaw, the only one to make a second appearance throughout the series, the mysterious Rags whose origins are unknown, the wide-reaching and looming danger of racism, the space toddler of the Pating, a few humans, a sentient universe that is incompatible with our own, and a billionaire. As you can see, there is a good deal of variety in this series, with these different foes coming in many different forms, and thus making these stories feel somewhat unique as our main characters deal with all of these kinds of threats. When you compare this to Series 12, there's quite a big difference, with villains actually reappearing more often and being utilized more throughout the series. The Master is in 4 of the 11 episodes, with a significant presence in 3 of them. The Cybermen also appear in the final 3 episodes of the series, and consequently, these two share a lot of the screen time.
You question the strategy of the Cyberium.
I do. I mean, it's good, but it's not great.
We see a decent amount of this throughout Series 12 actually, with the Master, the Kassavan, and Daniel Barton sharing a good deal of screen time together in Spyfall, the Judoon sharing some space with the Division, and the aforementioned teaming up of the Master and the Cybermen. So while we do see a variety of foes across both series, Series 12 didn't give them as much of an individual highlight. There were cases where this was done with the Dalek in Resolution, the Skithra Queen, and to an extent Zelen and Rakaya. Suki somewhat, but not really, because she was a Pete McTighe surprise villain TM, and you did get some focus with Ashad in Haunting of Illidati, but that was before the finale where he had to share screen time with the Master. And one thing that I think is worth noting is that though some of these villains are overlapping, that doesn't mean that none of them get enough time to shine. At least that's how I feel. Looking at the villains across Chibnall's era so far was quite interesting for me, because even though on paper I should prefer the approach that Series 11 took with introducing a slew of new monsters and giving them each a story within that season, in practice I found Series 12's to be more effective and have more memorable presence. They just worked better for me, despite my personal preference for new villains and giving the show a breath of fresh air. I found that this aspect of Series 12 was better. In examining the kinds of stories told within this era of the show, it's hard to know what aspect to really focus on, as it is such a broad topic, so I won't. I'll just discuss the differences and similarities I feel are noteworthy. Series 11 gives you a wide variety of different kinds of stories that feel different from one another. There are no multi-parters, and each one is largely standalone, with very few elements carrying across the series other than our main characters, the development of them, and I suppose the reappearance of Tim Shaw. This stands in sharp contrast to Series 12, where you have 2 multi-part stories, each 2 parts long, serving as the opener for the series and the finale. So to an extent, there is less variety because there are just less stories, but I think it's also true that even though some stories are longer, that does just give them more time to play around with all of their elements. And in a way, you could also say Series 12 has more variety in terms of the structure of its season because they aren't all standalone stories, so I suppose there's multiple ways to look at it. And with regards to the series arc, Series 11's was practically non-existent. The only major thing that carried across the show was the relationship between Ryan and Graham.
But at least we got each other, right? Granddad.
And while Series 12 did have some standalone episodes, it also kicked off the reintroduction of the Timeless Child and the destruction of Gallifrey, setting up the arc that our characters would follow. And of 11 episodes, 10 if you don't count Resolution, 6 of them contributed to the series' overall arc. So just the structure of these different stories within their seasons is quite different. And just in terms of variety and quality of the actual stories, I do think that both succeed in this regard. You have a pretty good mix of historical stories, present day ones, and future stories throughout both. It's hard to say which one has more variety because Series 11 has a good deal of that in terms of the different places we go to, as Series 12 sticks primarily to Earth, but then again, Series 12 gives you all of these different kinds of stories that really do feel fresh and like they all offer something entirely different. Something I personally feel Series 11 does, but to a lesser extent. So I'm not sure which one has the edge in terms of variety. However, in terms of quality, I do believe Series 12 was overall significantly more consistent and had more standout stories than its predecessor. For me personally, I do generally prefer Series 12's approach with regard to stories. I think a big series opener really helps to get viewers interested and hook everybody with the tease of a story arc, and coming back to it in the middle of a series set in between a few almost entirely standalone stories helps in feeling like the show is recognizing the arc, not throwing it to the side, while still leaving some breathing room for the actual individual stories that played such a prominent role in Series 11. And having a big finale to leave viewers on with a cliffhanger for the upcoming special gives the series a degree of closure and finality, which I don't feel they really did as well in 2018. There's nothing inherently wrong with the approach in Series 11, but in terms of personal preference, Series 12 does hit a bit closer to home for me. I think the style of the show is really the most subjective of any of the things I want to discuss here, and it really all is so very subjective. But this is such a broad thing to just say because it is quite difficult to really define and highlight. But for me, the style of these two series just felt quite different. In Series 11, you have lots of standalone stories, brand new characters, all new villains. It in many ways feels like a bit of a return to the classic series of the show, and there's something I find to be very appealing about that. But then Series 12 goes in a different direction, being this really big, grand season where the Daleks come back as the first returning villain, the Master comes back in a completely new incarnation, you have the Judoon back, the Severin make a significant appearance, as well as this really big mystery in the form of the Timeless Child. So in a lot of ways, this series really feels like it's much grander, like it's really doing something different. The direction itself makes some degree of sense, introducing these new characters and spending a year making a show that serves as a good introduction to new audiences without having to rely on pre-existing villains. And then to start to bring in even more familiar elements with 13-second series. On that level, I do think it works, but I also feel what it does is results in two series that stylistically feel quite different from one another. For me, this is one of the hardest ones to personally pick between because there's things I quite like about both. I've always really enjoyed these huge stories that have such a large scale to them, but I am recently finding a bit of a newfound appreciation for the more small scale stories that we got more of in Series 11.
We do this every Sunday.
Oh, happy Sunday.
In some ways, I do find the first of these two to be a more comfortable series, but Series 12 also has some huge ambitions that I love. I think in terms of style, today I am going to go for Series 11, though don't be terribly surprised if I change my mind in the future. So these are just a few of the aspects I wanted to look at these two stories from, comparing the different approaches they have to them and which one I prefer. And the conclusion that I am coming to is that while Series 11 has a preferable style and in many ways an approach that I prefer on paper, in execution, Series 12 is my preferred series. It's got the drama, it's got the scale, and it's got some absolutely fantastic stories, which I am always going to remember. To me, these are both quality series, but this one just did so much right and really excelled in many ways, and I just love it. So those are my thoughts on Series 11 and 12 and their major differences and similarities of Chibnall's two series so far. Which one do you prefer? It's quite interesting to see how they really have so many significant differences to me. I feel like you are inherently going to get people that do just prefer one over the other because the changes between the series are so noticeable and apparent. I do see the appeal of and like both, but at the end of the day, it is going to be Series 12 for me. So if there are any notable differences or similarities that I missed, then feel free to leave those down below, what things that you think are different about these series, or just which one you prefer and why you prefer it. And with all of that said, I hope to see you around for more Doctor Who discussions, rankings, and reviews, and if not, that is absolutely fine so long as you know that I appreciate your time here today. And with that said, thank you very much for watching, take care, and have a lovely week.